Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Keisha, Shannon, Deidre. Some more people should be filing in. Hold on 1 second. Some more people should be filing. All right, I see. Hold on 1 second. Okay, so today, this is a whole lot of content that I have to cover in just an hour and a half. So the goal is to, after each phase of strategy, and I'll tell you when that is, I will seek feedback on the content, your reaction, and how you think you can apply it in your work environment, as well as throughout the presentation or the webinar. I'll allow you all to put information into the chat and be able to answer the questions that way, because today there's a whole lot of content that I have to cover in only an hour and a half. I mean, extremely a lot of content, but it's valuable content that you can use to help you understand what strategy management means, how to apply strategy management, the drivers and the elements of strategy management and phases. And there's a lot of nuances of strategy that, based on my experience, developing strategies for corporations, academic medical institutions, higher ed institutions, small business manufacturing, you will be able to see how a lot of the information that I'm covering connects to the work that you're doing, and how you can take that work and actually apply it as I explain it throughout this presentation. So I don't have my moderator today, but her name is Dr. Abby Adelecki. She would actually cover this part, but please keep your microphones, mute your microphones, check your software to ensure that you can speak whenever you raise your hand. Be respectful. People come from different walks of life, so their take on certain content that's discussed may be different than yours. So be respectful. Leave comments, raise your hand during discussions, and please participate. So the first thing I want to do is ask you, are you team tea or team coffee? Place it in the chat so I can see who's team tea, who's team coffee. What's the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning? Do you grab a cup of tea or do you grab a cup of coffee? I'm actually team tea. I don't drink it as often as I should. And I just never got into coffee. And I think it's based on the experience I had when I was a teenager that changed my perspective for me. Okay, we got two team teas, one team coffee. Three team T's. Okay. Again, hold on so much. There's a lot of content to discuss. So, my name is Dr. Mario Wallace. For those who don't know me, I've been uh, facilitating and developing strategy for over 20 years, and that is in the healthcare space, uh, private practice space, small business, academic medicine, higher ed, manufacturing, and so forth. Over that time, I've written multiple books, and that is Strategy Spelled Adam, which is a Strategy Spelled Adam is a more in-depth academic read, but the Executive Performance Journal is a resemblance of that particular book, but it's more of a workbook to help you walk through strategy as you're trying to execute it. So it gives you a guide from beginning to end. And the Unstoppable Leader is also the book Unstoppable Leader is more focused on operations, right? Things related to uh, Lean Six Sigma, those practical process driven tools that you can use to increase your efficiency. And let me say something about that part. We have to understand that strategy gives us direction, and operations, anything that's operational, helps us to find great efficiencies, cost savings, and so forth. That's more operation, that's not strategic intent. But when you pair both of them together, it creates a more robust process for strategy management. Strategy is one part, gives us direction. Operation is here. It helps us to find those efficiencies within our organization. I'm certified in the Balanced Scorecard, change management, pro side, and also just facilitating workshops and things like that. Today, there's only 3 learning objectives that we would take away, and that's being able to explain the origins of strategic planning, describe the Balanced Scorecard method as it relates to strategy management, and articulate the phases and drivers of the Adam strategy management model. We'll get more into that as I go on with the slides. So here are the big questions. Did you know that 80% of customers are not employees are not aware of the company strategy? I mean, this is across the board. Remember now, the employees are the people who should advance the strategy in the organization. They help leaders mobilize the people to advance the strategy. But 80%, a research conducted by Norton of Kaplan and Norton, of the Palladium Group, which is affiliated with the Harvard Business School, conducted a study of S&P 500 companies in just higher ed, academic medicines, and hospitals, and the results of that study said that 80% of employees are not aware of the company strategy. 60% of the strategies are not linked to a budget, right? And we'll get more into how do you link strategy to a budget, but 60% is not linked to a budget. And what does that mean? That means that if the initiatives or projects that's associated with a strategic plan are not linked to a budget, then mostly, and most of the time, those initiatives would not be executed, would not be implemented, because there is no resource associated with that initiative. It's just a word in your strategic plan. And 50% of companies do not have a formalized process for reviewing their strategy. When I evaluate strategy across institutions, what I find out is that when I evaluate a previously implemented strategic plan before I do work with that leader, what I find most executives say to me is that they don't know how much of the plan was executed. Maybe 20% of the plan was executed. And they can't point to which piece of the plan was executed. Even in that leader's specific area, that leader would tell me, I don't know how much of the plan was executed. So this is common across industry. Everything I'm saying to you is common across industry. This is not something I found in isolation, such as healthcare or higher ed. These statistics are common across industry. Thus, That's why it's important for us to have this discussion today about strategy. So what is strategic planning? According to Sun Tzu, in warfare, right, first lay the plan which ensures victory, and then lead your team to the battlefield. If you would not begin with a strategy but rely on brute strength alone, victory will no longer be assured. So what does that mean? Think about it in terms of business strategy. If there is no rigorous, thought out plan that's with discipline, and if we're trying to advance an organization without having some type of strategic direction that's resourced with a budget and the right people who are mobilized to drive the strategy, as well as having knowledge of resistant management and risk, so all of it can work in concert together, then victory would no longer be assured. So what does that mean? The concept of strategy came from the military, right? Before it was a business concept. So what does that mean? if if you think of war, the Greeks came up with a term called strategic or stratego. That was a concept that they used for strategy, how they went out into the field and battled, right? The generals determined how to play on the battlefield, and the teams were mobilized, and they went out and actually tried to conquer or defeat their competition. The term tactic or tactical is also a term that came from the Greeks. And it means just a formalized process of doing battle on the battlefield. So tactics or tactica is a concept for strategic initiatives or projects, a formalized process to help advance a strategy. You choose a strategic initiative that supports a strategic objective, and based on the target within that strategy, it helps to drive that performance towards a specific target. And we'll get more into that piece. So initially, as the concept of strategy, strategio, and tactica became popular amongst people over time, people started having their own approach to strategy. As you can see here, there was a formalized line approach where the offense and defense will face off against each other on the battlefield. And that's what we can see is that a lot of people died. It wasn't truly strategic intent on how to do strategy. At this time, it was a concept of war in battle. So there wasn't a real rigorous approach to how to do strategy. There was, we can say, there was intellect involved in how they did it, but at the time, strategy hadn't advanced and became innovative, where people can have a more complex approach to strategy. Thus, the formalized line approach, a lot of people were slaughtered, right? Because people can just shoot across, and it was about numbers of people who survived after the shooting who actually was victorious. Now, as strategy began to become more complex, generals came up with different solutions to attack strategy on the battlefield. As you can see in this picture, drones became a part of strategy. Drones became a part of war. And today we have a more advanced, innovative, true tactical approach to strategy. Now, how does it connect to business strategy? Well, in the 1960s, a man named Igor Ansov, a Russian American mathematician and business manager, coined the term strategy for business and created the field of business and strategy management. So when this took place, the terms strategic objective, goal, initiative, they were not truly defined. So people did it multiple ways. Over time, from the 60s to the 2000s, a lot of theories have surfaced and have been published that really define what strategy is. And that is blue ocean strategies, looking at how do you compete in a space where you're there alone, you don't have true competitors. Red ocean strategies, how to compete against competitors within an industry, right? The five forces is a concept of red ocean strategies. The value chain is a concept of red ocean strategies. And then there is a concept called platform strategies, and that is the new concept that Uber, Airbnb, Facebook, Instagram, and so forth. Meaning, how do you use existing networks and people without having a staff of people on payroll, right? So think of Uber for a second. Uber does not employ the people who drive for Uber as well as the homes of Airbnb. But there is a centralized company that controls it all through some type of technology. That's a different approach to strategy. It is not the same as Red Ocean, which you're competing directly against a competitor. So your structures is different. You create strategic tactics based on how do you mitigate resistance within an industry that's very competitive. Blue Ocean is how you sail alone, build a strategy where you're in that space alone until it becomes murky and red as people start to try to adapt what you're doing. And platform strategy is a concept in which you use existing resources to advance your strategy. And that is one of the most effective concepts of strategy today is a platform strategy. So let's talk about strategy, what it looks like today, and how do we do it. So strategy is a concept that consists of time. An element of strategy is time, and another element of strategy is value. And if there is no strategy, we have a concept, what we call business as usual. Nothing would change in your organization if it's not aligned to some type of strategy. People will continue to do the same thing over and over again without advancing the mission of the organization. Basically, they will sustain how the organization exists. But over time, you have depreciating values that will take place. Strategy is focusing on a particular direction in the future, identifying the right strategic objectives and strategies to get you there. And over time, the value increases for the customer. But in order to do that, you have to stretch your organization and create what we call a value gap. And that is related to performance. You have to stretch your organization to a point where people in the organization don't have the necessary skills, competencies, and behaviors to perform and drive performance within the new plan. You have to get them ready to be able to perform in the new plan, or you have to recruit and hire from outside the institution to ensure that strategy can be advanced. If there is no risk in strategy, what's the purpose of the strategy? There must be risk in strategy in order to try to achieve the unknown, achieve things that the organization had not achieved before. So again, since Igor came up with the concept of strategy, it has continued to become more complex and more strategic in intent. So now we're talking about, well, how do we align an organization to a strategic plan? Since we have the concept of what's an objective, what's a goal, what's an initiative, what's all those things, how do we align an organization to those points? So most organizations focus are misaligned in their approach to strategy, meaning at the top of the arrow, you see on the misaligned, you see the arrow going straight north. And then underneath it, you see the arrows going in different directions. Those are different business units within an organization. That means that there is a parent strategy at the top, but the people, the business unit within the organization are focused on different things and it's not aligned. So it's not creating what I call synergy across the organization. What we want to see in a strategy focused organization is aligned business unit. We have a corporate plan, and all the plans underneath it supports the corporate plan, although they compete within their specific industry. For example, if we think of a higher ed institution, and we have academic affairs, we have business and finance, we have research, we have um, the medical center. Each one of them should align to the institutional strategy, but they compete in different industries. So we cascade, we ensure the alignment, but we also build their strategy to ensure they can compete within their industry, to be more competitive within their space for multiple reasons, to attract new students, to attract new physicians, medical professionals, right? And so forth, to grow more money for the organization, to improve population health, and so forth. But when you align an organization, you get economies of scale, right? Lower costs, leveraging resources. We have a line business unit, horizontal integration. That means the business units are also supporting each other in their approach to strategy. We got strategic objectives or goals that are pushed down into the organization that aligns to the company's strategy, the corporate strategy. We have budgeted strategic initiatives and shared resources. So what is strategy? So this is a concept that I came up with. It's called the Adam model, and I explain it more in detail on the, I think, 2 slides forward. Is there are 4 buckets of strategy when you think of strategy. One is analyze, the other is develop, and then you have execute and manage. What I find most often is that leaders are great at analyzing and developing plans, but they're poor at executing the plan. Thus, execution and management does not truly exist. Plans are developed and they're socialized on the internet within the organization, and they're put on the shelf for the remainder of the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. If strategy is executed in any parts of the organization, it's a haphazard. People haphazardly were able to do some work towards the strategy. It wasn't intentional, it was haphazard because leaders didn't align the organization to the strategy. In order to understand how, according to the Adam model, and how to develop a strategy where I work in putting information inside of a workbook, I have a book that's published called Executive Performance Journal. You can actually purchase that book on Amazon. And from the beginning of strategy, even an assessment is in there to determine what your strengths are as it relates to strategy. To the end of strategy, you will be able to follow along in a sequence fashion and understand how to apply strategy. So the concept of strategy, the Adam model, it buckets elements of the Balanced Scorecard, which is a tool from the Harvard Business School from authors Kaplan and Norton, that has existed over 25 years. And it buckets because the Balanced Scorecard didn't actually bucket the drivers of certain phases, like the analyze phase, the development phase, the execution phase, and the management phase. The Balanced Scorecard is taught how to do these things, but it doesn't give you a sequence or a sequential way to do them. In my research, I arrived, well, the results of my research is this actual model that makes it linear and easy to apply for most people. And we will go through each of the 4 phases within this presentation. So analyze, there are 4 drivers of this particular phase. And the first one is environmental scan. When you think of strategy management, you have to be able to conduct a thorough and a disciplined environmental scan. You have to look out whatever industry you're in. You have to be able to look out into that industry and identify things that's relevant to your organization. Like, this is the world news. If you look for anything related to higher ed institution, world news is your place to look, right? Rankings and so forth. The which is the best program that exists, which is the best land grant institution, which is the best HBCU institution. Those ranking exists within the U.S. News report. This is a great source of scanning that you need to do. This data that you find, you need to determine if you're trying to exceed or grow in ranking, if you're academic medicine or a higher ed institution, or you're trying to compete at the same level of another institution. You determine what you're going to do with that data. You know, if we think of healthcare, we'll look across a state. This is one of the state of Tennessee to understand, you know, the birth rates and so forth, the growth of the population, shrinkages within a rural populated community, growth within the urban community. It depends on what you're looking for. The whole thing of environmental scan is understanding the data sources in the database that you need. All of this information is in some type of database. It's identifying the database that you're seeking to gather the information to advance your organization. Just look for the databases out there. You know, you got the government databases, you got the healthcare databases. You have U.S. News report databases, small business databases. You got academic journal databases. You just have to pull. You got Google Scholar as a database. You have to pull information that you're looking for. You really have to understand the political landscape, the economic landscape, the technological landscape, the things that's changing, the societal landscape. You have to look for information within those 4 buckets. It's called the PEST, and pull that information into your organization for leaders to really analyze the data to figure out what are they looking for to help advance their strategy. This is information about rankings in schools also. If you're ranked 8 and you want to be ranked a 6 or a 5, what does it take to get the organization there? What resources needed to get the organization there? What staffing is needed to get the organization there? Is there a faculty issue to help get the organization there? I'm working with an organization now that needs at least 250 net new faculty to increase the ranking from 18 to 6. So in order to do that, it's based on the number of faculty, the number of published research, the impact of the research. So we have to figure out where we want to go, what organization we're working with in order to drive the strategy. What exactly from an environmental scan is needed to help leaders evaluate and determine an approach for strategy. So one thing that's unique for us, based on everything I just mentioned to you, is this concept called Chat GPT. If you are a strategist or planning to be a strategist, if you are a director or executive director of a business unit or an organization, this tool here is very helpful for you. If you do not have an account, I suggest that you open an account. It's free. It's called OpenAI Chat GPT. It's Google on steroids, and I'm not exaggerating. Well, you can actually go into this particular tool and type in for Arkansas, Little Rock, Arkansas, and this is just an example. What is the population health condition and social determinants of health condition in Southeast Arkansas? It would actually give you, and then you say, and the answer that you give me, Chat GPT, please give it to me with citations included, in text and reference citations, so I can research and look up some of this, and type it out in at least 2 pages. It would actually do exactly what you ask, right? Regardless, it will give you exactly what you're looking for. Now, once it gives you the information, you have to get it and tweak it and make it fit what you're trying to do. But if you're trying to do an environmental scan, it will give you the beginning that you need before you go to any other data source. So after gathering all that data, you have to socialize that data with executives. And this is called the executive interviews. You take all that data, you identify 5 or 6 top priorities that you see in the market, and direction that the institution needs to be more competitive or to be more innovative for their future. And you meet with executives, all the cabinet leaders, external executives who they point you to, some of their partners that's associated with the company or with the organization, and you have a standardized set of questions, a standard set of questions, 5 to 10 questions. The questions are future casting. What does the future look like? How is the organization positioned to advance a strategy? You have those type of questions, and you interview them and collect data based on those 6 priorities that you identified in the market, and you allow them to weigh in on those particulars. You take that information and you boil that information down, and you meet with mid-level managers across the institution, directors and managers, and you take that market analysis, those 6 priorities, and the information that you gather from those executives. You look for patterns within that information because you don't want to give them a whole lot to be too overwhelming. You look for patterns within that information, and you trim it down, and you have a focus group, and you allow people across the institution. You go on a tour. You allow people from across the institution at the mid-level management level to weigh in on the market data and what the executive said, because they are closer to the operations, and they can say that the executive leaders are not close enough to understand the barriers and the challenges at the operational level, but they can have that conversation. They can articulate that conversation to you. Now, once you conduct the executive interviews and then conduct the mid-level management interviews, again, you need to boil down all that data, trim it down. You need to trim it down because now you want to present it to the organization. You want to present it to the organization in more word cloud approaches, right? Where people can use the phone. I can hear some background noise. Can you mute your microphone? So what you want to do is you want to trim it down. You want to put it in more multiple choice type questions in word cloud, and you want to socialize with the entire campus. That means that you want to schedule at least 4 or 5 town halls so that you can capture a high percent of the people in the organization who can weigh in on the strategy. The reason why, can someone mute their mic? Okay, thank you. You want them to be able to interact with the information through a word cloud so they can see it in real time or multiple choice. The reason why this is the beginning of change management, we have to mitigate resistance as we roll the strategy out. This is before we begin to develop the plan. We have to figure out a way to mitigate resistance as we roll the plan out. And the best way to mitigate resistance is allow people to react to information. That's the first thing of change, is the reaction. Once you get the reaction, you can develop strategy to mitigate against that reaction. But the first thing is let people weigh in on content way before you've created a strategic plan. So the way you can do town hall is using poll everywhere, and that's a concept that you can pencil in. Poll everywhere. It's a web-based application where people can you can send people a code where they can type into their phone and they can actually interact in real time. The way to do focus groups in executive interviews is you can use a concept called Timmy, so that it can record the information in the interview, and once you're done, and Timmy is spelled TEMI, and it's .com. It's artificial intelligence. It will actually record the information and transcribe the information in real time for you in a transcript. And you take the transcript and you look for patterns within the transcript that you can trim down and share with the mid-level leaders, which eventually gets to the frontline workers in a town hall. It speeds up the process for you where you don't need multiple people doing this work. You can have a small team that's with expertise that can carry out this work. With that said, I want if there are any questions or feedback on the concept of the analyst of strategy. There is no questions, any comment. We just keep plowing through. Again, it's a whole lot of content, but I really want to be able to answer any questions, any real-time questions related to a situation or a potential opportunity that you are planning to do with an organization to drive strategy. Okay, let's keep moving. So this is something I said earlier, that most strategic plans go through an intense development process and later placed on the shelf. It's a term called SPOT, S-P-O-T, strategic plans on the shelf. That is common across industry. I mean, common, right? Organization bring in executives or consultants, external consultants, and they pay between $200,000 to $500,000 to develop strategic plans that eventually makes it to the shelf, right? What I'm trying to do is build the competencies of people in this webinar and just people I talk to help them to be able to carry the strategy. There is an element of execution that is missing. The execution is why plans are placed on the shelf. The management phase is why plans are placed on the shelf. We have to be rigorous in our approach to execution and management, and we'll talk more about that in the presentation. But the failure comes from lack of discipline in the execution and implementation, and lack of discipline in managing the strategy. Process improvement became popular through Jack Welch of GE because it was a cost-saving concept, which was great, but leaders became bored managing long-term strategies. They needed something that they can return an investment on faster. So they settled with process improvement. So for 30 years, for 25 years to be exact, process improvement overshadowed strategic planning. And again, like Michael Porter says, the founder of competitive strategies, Red Ocean strategies, the five forces, the value chain, the generic strategies, and so forth. He said that process improvement is not strategy, it's operational, right? It structures your operation, it creates efficiencies within your operations. It gives you great cost savings from your operations by leaning it up. But it doesn't give you a direction as an organization. Strategy gives you a direction. So he said operations is not strategy, but when it's aligned to strategy, it creates a more robust approach to your strategy. And so that's what we have to think about. We have to be able to separate operations from strategy. So this phase is called the development phase. It's the second phase of the ADAM model. The first phase is analyze. The second phase is develop. The third phase is execution, and the fourth phase or execution or implementation, and the fourth phase is manage. This is development phase. Now, after we've done the environmental scan, it's time to develop the strategy. How do we do it? There are multiple elements that you can see here that you must go through in order to develop a strategic plan. And the first one is a strategic vision. So a strategic vision is not what we see within most strategic plans today. Most strategic plans today, the strategic vision is written like the purpose of the organization, which is the mission of the organization. Mission has purpose, vision has direction. You have to write a plan that has a direction. Here's a kicker to a strategic vision. It expires once you've achieved the outcomes within that strategic plan. That vision expires. You have to create a new vision and a new strategic plan. in order to keep driving the organization, right? So I've worked with companies, um, chancellors and presidents of organizations, CEOs, who take the same vision and copy and paste it going forward. Each year, each new strategy, they use the same vision. But think about it for a second. The market is dynamic and the market always changes. So why are we using the same vision? If Apple continues to use the vision that Steve Jobs had, Apple would cease to exist. Google is having challenges because of not changing their vision. Now we have Chat GPT that's outperforming Google search engine, right? Just within 2 months, Chat GPT has increased to over 30 million people within 30 days that start using it. Now we're up to 60 million people as opposed to using Google. So a strategic vision has three elements: a horizon, a direction in the future with a date on the horizon. When will it end? A bold statement and a niche, right? What is the position? What is unique about our approach? So let's look at this one right here for a second. And this is just something hypothetical, something that was created for this conversation. By 2030, a strategic horizon, 2030 is the time that the vision will end and expire. Starbucks would increase their urban storefront location by 65%. That's the vision, right? It's bold. There has a niche, right? Urban storefront location is the focus for that vision. And as you can see at the bottom again, today at the bottom, you see at the bottom where it says today, and you look across to your right, it says 2030. Between today and 2030 is a time continuum. As you look at the top where it says vision, value will continue to increase because why? You look to your left, storefronts will go from 25% in urban populated areas today to 65%. We can actually measure the success of this strategy. We can measure it by its strategic vision, not even going deeper into its strategic objective, just the vision alone. We can measure the success of the strategy. But how do we measure it? We have to continue to identify objective measures, targets, and initiatives to help drive, and then we have to mobilize the people to get there. But in the mobilization of people, we have a concept called resistance management, and I'm going to talk about something that General Honore, who helped to advance after Katrina in New Orleans to get the community in the city back together. He said that change management is a people logistic issue, not just a communication issue. And let me say it again, it's a people logistic issue. How do you move people through phases and mitigate resistance as you move them through those phases to achieve the outcome that you want? Most people, when they think of strategy, which is a change to organization, it creates resistance within organization. They go on a talking campaign and they talk people and they keep talking to people expecting something to change. No. In order to mobilize change, the strategist who works with the change manager and the project manager needs to understand logistics. But it's a different form of logistic than a supply chain. The current concept of logistic, the supply are the people. We have to get the people and logistically mobilize them to drive the strategy. Here's one for Airbnb, the same thing. You look across the bottom, what's the goal by 2030? Profit 100 million up to 300 million. Same thing. This is me breaking it down into the buckets that you probably would do just to write it out as you work with leaders. You know, you write a bold stretch goal, you determine a niche, and you write it out, and you determine a strategic horizon, and you take all of it and you pull all of it together. That is your strategic vision. If your vision has no date and time, with in which it expires, it's mostly a purposeful statement and mostly a replacement for a mission for your organization. What mobilized us is that we know by 2030 we should have achieved our vision. The institution is mobilized by that specific date. So we need to give them something to focus on that they can know over time the progress that they're achieving as they get closer towards that specific date. So let's go a little further. The first thing was in the development stage phase was a strategic vision. The second thing we have to, now we know what the vision is, we have to create what we call a change agenda, a strategic change agenda that tells us the current state and the future state of specific things that must change in the organization to achieve the strategic vision. So let's talk about this for a second. Robert Mueller branded the concept of strategic change agenda on the national stage. It was a concept that existed, but it wasn't branded until after 9/11. Cheney and Bush had him to put together a document that explained the past and the future and how they need to resource the agencies to prevent any terrorist attack on the U.S. soil. The change agenda is a must-have when it comes to identification of strategic priorities. Did you know that it's a tool for alignment? It's lacking to a research question, and we'll explain that more. So it's a tool to identify and assess the current state of things within your organization and the desired future performance. So what does that mean? You have to, it's predicated off a strategic vision. You only build out a change agenda that support a strategic vision. The vision is here, the change agenda is here. The vision said we want to go here, we want to advance population health in rural populated areas. We want to increase healthcare professionals, more specialists in these populated areas that have a low percent there today. How do we get there? What's the current state? What's the current state of a specific domain, like technology, right? Is there integrated technology across these rural populated areas that supports some type of urban connection, nexus of where all that data flows? Do we have the right resource, the right people? Do we have the right locations? So we have infrastructure concept that needs to change, Wi-Fi concept that needs to change in that rural populated area, staffing that needs to change. We need to describe the current state of those things. Then we need to describe the future state. And the value gap comes between the current state and the future state. So let's talk about it for a second. So this is a description of a change agenda. You have the performance dimension, you have the as is, the to be, and the value gap. Whenever you have a strategic vision, you have to identify what's the performance, what area that need to change. As is, how does it perform today? How should it perform in the future? And between the as is and the to be, it creates what we call a value gap, which leads to the development of strategic priorities. How do we close the value between the current state, the as is, and the to be state? This is an example. So this is Robert Mueller's change agenda that was presented to the president. This document, he laminated and he walked around with it for 2 years. Everybody he spoke with on the Hill, he talked to them through the change agenda because he was trying to resource the changes in the agencies. And he needed people to buy in. He needed to socialize this concept before the strategy was ever developed. Once he got the people on board and knew that it could be resourced, then they developed the strategic plan. So if you think about it, the past, it was more case driven and the agencies were not sharing information. And you see in the middle, these are the domains of the performance dimensions that he said needs to change. Roles need to change. The focus needs to change. Information sharing needs to change. Intelligence community needs to change. human capital, culture, information technology. Basically, he had identified based on the vision to ensure that we don't have another attack on our soil. What do the federal agencies need to change to prevent that? He built a change agenda. He described the performance domain that needs to change. To your left, he described the agencies, how they perform today. If you look at internal communication, ineffective communication. If you look at senior management, they were tactical. If you look at scope, they were domestic and they shift to global, right? He determined the performance domain that supports the strategic vision. He described the current state and he described the future state. Now he had to resource this concept in order to help the organization or the presidential organization get us to the future state. This is one that I put together for just to weigh in on. But I also added to this one the value gap. So we will be the best acute care provider in the South through the synergies of research, clinical care, and strategic leadership. How do we get there? The domains, the performance dimensions are geography, quality of systems, nurses, staffing, healthcare profession, and patient experience. These are the domains that I'm saying that needs to change to help get us there to that strategic vision. The current state looks like this. Geography, high dense urban population, desired future state, expanding to rural areas. The value gap is 15 out of 30 rural populations. Move this out of the way for a second. Have RHCs, FQACs. 75% lack Wi-Fi towers, less than 40, and 75% lack Wi-Fi towers. Right. This is just hypothetical, just something put together. Quality of system, decentralized electronic medical record systems. The future is streamlined EMR system across academic medical institutions in rural health center in RHCs. That's Western Medical Center. And the value gap is less than 45% of EMRs at the RHCs and FQHCs are streamlined and integrated, right? What we're seeing, the value gap is helping us to formulate the strategic objectives for the plan. The change agenda is helping to align us to the vision. It based on performance dimensions in current state and desired future state, but it helped us to determine what the value gap is. The value gap give us the information to start to build out a strategic plan, if that makes sense. This is one of the best tools to use when developing a strategic plan, or if you're just using the tool in general. Let's move forward. So after we're still in development phase. After we've developed a strategic vision, we've built out a change agenda that leads to a value gap. The next thing we're doing is to take our time, draft those goals and objectives, and populate them in what we call a strategy map. Oh, 1 second. How do we gather data to determine the value gap? So basically, once you've identified your performance dimension and you drew out what the let me go back for a second, and you describe what the current state is and where you want to be in the future according to your market analogy. Remember the initial environmental scan, where do you want to be in the future? Then you go out and conduct your research. You look at your internal data. Look within your database. If you're a hospital, look in your EMR system. See what you've done in the past. Look for a baseline of data, what you've done in the past. Then look outside, right? Look around, look at your competitors, pull data from their existing information. to see how to benchmark against them according to that same specific domain. If we're talking about geography and from urban to rural populated areas, in order to increase Wi-Fi towers, in order to us to understand what that looks like, we have to conduct an environmental scan of those rural populated areas. Through talking to you can get a lot of stuff from the health department, but you have to conduct environmental scan to see how many towers, how many people have access, because we're trying to drive digital health and telehealth. So, um, which reduce the amount of seniors having to travel back and forth to hospitals. Some of their care can be done through digitally. So we have to conduct a more environmental scan of that specific area, and that will give us the data we need to populate the value gap. We have to, and great question. Um, a lot of it is conducted through an internal scan. Just go through your organization, look at existing data within your organization, and then whatever targeted area you're trying to go to, um, look at data sources out in those areas to determine what that baseline is, because you want to build a strategy based on the baseline. Know exactly where you are, so you can increase or decrease the target. Right? You want to increase or you want to decrease. Get your baseline first, so you can know which direction you want to go in an organization as far as the strategy. So once we do this, once we craft those strategic objectives and we share those objectives with executives and they agree to these strategic objectives, you need to populate it in what we call a strategy map. And a strategy map is a cause and effect diagram. And let me explain why this diagram is so critical and so important. So these are strategic objectives. Most of the time, if you look at a traditional strategic plan, it's a 10 to 15, 30 page notebook or binder that has strategic objectives throughout. It has measures associated with those objectives, strategies, and all these different things. Has projects and people assigned to those projects. But see, when you build strategy initially from the strategy map, you can see gaps within your strategic plan. So what is a strategy map? This concept, based on research and the Balanced Scorecard research, identified that the most successful organization drive performance through 4 perspectives. That's the financial perspective, the stakeholder customer perspective, the internal processes, where the work has to be constantly refined from a process improvement perspective to drive value to a customer. And then you have talent technology. Those are the intangible assets. So let's talk about what is that. So at the top of the strategy map are the outcomes that you expect to gain from your organization. You build those objectives first. What are the outcomes the organization wants to reach to know that it achieved its strategic vision? What is the customer expectation of those outcomes? We want to gather data, intelligence, and intel from the customer about the outcomes as we manage our strategy, right? First year, second year, third year, fourth year, fifth year. It depends on how long the strategic horizon of our plan. We want to engage with the customers throughout that entire life cycle of our strategy. We want them to tell us, are we meeting their expectation according to our strategy? Then as we go a step down, internal processes, that's the area in which the processes within your organization that you have to continue to refine to continue to increase value for your customer over the life span of the strategy. And as you get to the bottom, it's 3 things that you're thinking about: human capital, information capital, and organization cultural capital. So what does that mean? Human capital is the right talent to drive performance within your strategy, right? Recruiting the right talent, training up, skilling up the right talent, right, to drive strategy. Then you have information capital, the right systems, the right technologies to augment the skill of the people who are trying to do the work. And then you have organizational capital. What culture do you need to develop to ensure that strategy can be advanced? If your strategy is based on an innovation, discovery, creating new discovery and research to drive strategy, you shouldn't have a culture of process improvement. There may be elements of it, but the culture is about discovery and innovation. It's not about efficiency, right? So you have to match the culture to a strategy in order to drive reform within a strategy. You cannot have competing culture against your strategy because you're pulling in two different directions. So when you set a new strategy, you determine what the culture is to drive that strategy, and you align the strategy to the culture, right? So if the culture is you're trying to drive a high performing, diverse culture to drive a strategy, that means we need to see diversity sprinkled all the way throughout the organization. We need to see an uptick in underrepresented promotions, underrepresented hires, in research, faculty, staff, right? We need to see underrepresented minority programs, pipelines. That's the culture we're trying to drive for this specific strategy. 5 years later, we may shift to a more innovative culture. 6 years after that, we may shift to a more process improvement culture. We have to determine the culture that support our strategy. Does that make sense? So at the bottom of the strategy map, the type of strategic objective you need to write are related to the people, the talent, the information capital, what type of information, what type of technology needed that shifted, because technology keeps shifting, changing the landscape. And then what type of culture we need. Now, what do we do? So this document is a communication tool also, because everybody in the organization should have this tool with them. And whenever a leader approach anybody in the organization, they need to be able to point to a specific objective on this document and say, I support this specific strategic objective. So how do you support it? I do this. This is what I do every day to support this specific strategic objective. This ties and links an organization together just through this document. So most of the time when I do this with leaders or organization, we realize that there's gaps. When I go down to talent technology, I see that they didn't connect the people to the strategy. They didn't connect the system to the strategy. They didn't connect the culture to the strategy. So this document helps me to evaluate existing strategic plans before I work with a leader, because I need those things in there, because at the bottom of the plan are called intangible assets. At the top of the map they're called tangible assets: money, computer, equipment, things that they've had over years. That's considered a tangible asset. We have to align the people at the bottom, the culture and the system, to those outcomes, those financial tangible outcomes, to drive value within the strategy. So let's go further. Let me go back. Just talk about this for a second. After we have developed the objective within the strategy, we have to develop measures that support the actual strategies, right? So let's think for a second. So this one, where it says P2 on the internal processes, where it says provide proactive workforce solutions. I can determine proactive workforce solutions through absolute numbers, the number of workforce solutions that was created, or the number of workforce solutions that had an impact on an organization, right? If I go to align HR planning with institutional strategy, I can say, well, there's 35 business units in the organization that needs a strategy that aligns to the corporate strategy, okay? So I can say, this is internal processes, P1, align HR planning with HR strategy. The HR planning, there may be 30 different plans that need to be aligned. I can do that with numbers. I can do that with percents. I can say 10%, 20% the second year, 30% the 40 year, 50%, 80% the fifth year. So you have to determine what the measure is and what the target associated with that measure is. So if you got questions on this, because this is getting really granular, we go from the objective, the vision, the change agenda, to the actual strategy map from with the objectives. Now we're talking about the measure that support the objectives. Now, here's the thing. The only performance, the only action within a strategic plan is a project or a strategic initiative. Meaning, let's look for this for a second. If the objective is increase access to care, and the measure is number of new medical centers in rural counties, you have to have a strategic objective, which is, an initiative, a project is the only action item. So I have it highlighted blue here so you can see the separation. That is considered a strategic initiative. And we call it strategic because it directly supports something within the strategic plan. Most leaders have initiatives which are not strategic and intent. They're just initiatives that they have that they want to do. A strategic initiative is an initiative that supports a strategy within a strategic plan. Now, how does it support it? The purpose of a strategic initiative is to drive performance from the objective to the measure. What do I mean? If the target is 50, we have to identify the right strategic initiative to get us to 50 rural centers and medical centers in rural areas. Now, sometimes we create strategic initiative that doesn't help us get to that performance level. Thus, we have to go back to the drawing board. There's no problem, right? Strategy is a hypothesis that's tested over time. Again, strategy is a hypothesis that's tested over time. It's not perfect, but we learn as we manage the strategy. So we identify strategic initiatives that we think are robust enough to drive us to the desired outcome that we're trying to achieve. If, in fact, it doesn't, we can go back to the drawing board and identify a new initiative to help drive us there. Again, align staff to strategy. 10,000 medical professionals aligned to strategy is the target and the measure. Develop scorecards that align strategic job family to the strategy. The whole goal is once we develop those scorecards and align the people to the strategy, we want to align up to 10,000 people. That means that initiative is driving us to achieve that 10,000. Does that make sense? Because this one is one, I really need this one to really hone in and make sense. Because most nonprofit higher ed institution, they don't develop objectives and measures. They only develop strategic initiatives. They only develop projects. And those projects is not advancing an organization toward a specific goal. They just projects that they're doing. We need these initiatives to be developed after we develop our objectives and our measures and targets. Then we need the initiative developed, because now we're saying, okay, we have the objective, we have the target and the measure. We need some type of campaign, some type of initiative, some type of project to help us to achieve that outcome. Sometimes it's developed at the wrong time, and sometimes these initiatives are developed without any sense of some type of project or any sense of some type of strategic direction that's identified by the organization. Now, after we develop the strategy map, the initiatives, and the measures, targets, and the initiatives, the last thing is to take that information and put it into what we call a balanced scorecard. And so let me explain what a balanced scorecard is. So a balanced scorecard is a concept. It's basically a scorecard. And what's the reason why we say balance is because it separates the four perspectives that we talked about in the strategy map. Financial perspective that focus on short and long term financial outcomes. Stakeholder perspective that identify who the stakeholders are, who will receive the value from the strategy. Internal processes, which are the processes that we need to refine consistently, right? Customer relationships, innovation, compliance, operations. Those are things we need to continue to refine. And then lastly, talent and technology, which are the people, the culture, and the systems to drive strategy. So it's called the Balanced Scorecard because it identified the metrics that we've already developed, the measure, the target, and the initiative. All we do now is just populate it in the Balanced Scorecard, just populate it. So this is a scorecard, a tool that leaders look at consistently to know if they're progressing towards um, the actual strategic outcome. So what does it look like? So in the Balanced Scorecard, all the things I just talked about with you, the objectives are in there. The objective has to have a measure and a target. Maximize innovation in the delivery of educational courses. The measure is reduce didactic courses by 8%, and the target is 75%. So we want to reduce didactic courses by 75% in the new strategy. But the only way we can do it is by a strategic initiative, which is train faculty on active learning designs so they can start developing new courses instead of the old type of courses in the classroom for the students. So this is a clear circular concept of what needs to be included within a strategy. And most of the time, what I see with strategy is the objective and the initiative, or I see the initiative and I don't see measures and targets. I'm working with a client today over a huge area of an institution who has a lot of initiatives and projects, but no strategic objective. Also, and they call initiative action. I'm very action oriented. I want some action, action, action. I'm like, well, we need a direction first before we get into the action, and also we need to be able to measure the performance and the progress, so people feel aligned to a strategy and feel accomplished if they know that they're progressing. If their work is helping to progress towards an outcome. So we need something measurable. So execute. So let's talk for a second. Anybody have any questions about the development phase of this model? From the strategic vision, the change agenda, the strategy map, the measures, targets, and initiative, and lastly, the Balanced Scorecard. Now you can talk. You can put something in chat. Just any feedback on that information to ensure that I covered it effectively where it transfer. Do clients take such a laborious process? So great question. So right now I'm working with a client that they tend to try to skip steps because it's a very intense process, but it ensures success if it's done correctly. So a lot of the processes, if you are working with the client, you are doing most of it on the back end and you're sharing it with the client. You just getting feedback from them. You allow them to react and weigh into it. Yeah. So no, clients, it's the whole concept of the Adam model is to help develop strategy for busy leaders who don't have the time to constantly weigh in on all these different process steps. But yeah, sometimes you run up against cultural challenges, and you have to be able to get through the cultural challenges. You have to be able to nudge leaders to think differently. And nudging is a concept called behavior economics. Look up a book called Nudging and Behavior Economics, because that helps you to nudge people to persuade them to use such a rigorous method. But yeah, that's a great question. Every time they want to enter into marketing. Yeah. So strategies is like once every 5 years, once every 10 years, because at the end of the year, there's a concept called strategy refresh that we must do to drive strategy, to change it. But yeah, it's a rigorous process, and sometimes you have challenge, so you have to have the skill to nudge leaders along in the process.
And how do you manage it for like a large global organization where every business unit wants to do their own thing and they are so disconnected from the headquarters?
Great question. So you have to get them to agree to the corporate strategy. That's the president. That's the chancellor and the board. You have to get them to agree at that level first before you can cascade down. That means that once you get the cabinet and the board agree to the corporate strategy, they have to go on what we call a sponsor roadmap tour. They have to go out and sell that strategy across the institution. And once they sell it, then we can start cascading down. But I'm a good question, and I'll show you that in the execution phase, what that looks like. So execution, after the strategy is developed, there is risk that you need to assess. There is alignment and cascading that needs to take place. And that goes back to your question that you just asked. Communication planning needs to be developed because we need all leaders to lead out of those strategy sessions able to communicate the same way. And there's change management that needs to take place. So strategic risk is about identifying, evaluating, and managing risk associated with a business strategy. If you are trying to grow into a rural area using Wi-Fi technology that doesn't exist, and that's based on a partnership with a local politician. So a president of a university is working with a local politician to ensure that Wi-Fi towers are infrastructure is built across a specific rural populated area. The risk of that is if the relationship between the president, the chancellor, and the politician is something happening with the relationship, then it could affect the rollout of the infrastructure of Wi-Fi towers in that rural populated area. Thus, you look at your strategy and you determine in your strategic plan, your objectives, your measures, targets, and your initiative, where is there strategic risk? If you see risk in your plan anywhere, you write a mitigation plan and a contingency plan in case plan A fail, you can fall on plan B. It's critical. Before you roll your strategy out, before you align and cascade across the business units, you must assess it for risk, right? There's 3 categories of risk: a known known, known unknown, and unknown unknown. The one that we really focus on is the known unknown. That is a strategic risk. A known known is more policy has covered those type of risk. An unknown unknown is a hurricane, an earthquake, something happened that we wasn't expecting. But a known unknown is a strategic risk, meaning that we know that that politician relationship with the president something can happen where it can go left. We prepare by writing a mitigation strategy and a contingency plan if in fact that relationship does. So we are prepared before anything in the relationship may strengthen over time, but in case it doesn't, we are prepared through a contingency mitigating plan in case it does. We have a second source to help us fund and build out the Wi-Fi infrastructure in rural populated areas. The whole thing is enterprise derived value. Why do we cascade down into the organization? Why do we align the institution? We're seeking enterprise derived value. The sum of the total is greater than the sum of the individual. We need everybody pulling in the same direction within the organization in order to give us what we call synergy. Synergy is not 1 + 1 = 2. It's 1 + 1 = 4, 5, 6. It's a number, exponential number that's way different than traditional mathematics because a lot of units are pulling together. So we cascade strategy down through organization, meaning the concept of cascade leverage corporate portfolio. There's 2 types of cascade: of top down in the bottom up. These are two books that you can order to understand what cascading is and what a corporate strategy is. You must have a corporate strategy first to cascade down into the business units. So what is cascading? When you think of a strategic plan, you look at each objective in the plan. And at the top, I have parent, and at the bottom, I have cascade. You look at the plan and you say, should this objective be passed down to these four business units? And you say, is it mandatory? Meaning, should the objective be passed down to exactly what it is with the measure, targets, and initiative associated with it? Or should it look different because the business unit is competing in a different space? Should the cascade look a little different? Meaning, should the business unit support it from a contributory perspective? Meaning, it's not written the exact same way. It's written to support that business unit, but it has an indirect impact on the institutional strategy. Or should we just create a totally new strategic objective for that business unit that somewhat support the institutional plan, the corporate plan, but it really helps to solidify that unit to compete within its individual industry? So these are the three concepts that we think of when we cascade. We look at every objective on the plan and we ask ourselves, should we push it down to the next unit from a mandatory word for word? Should we push it down to the next unit from a contributory, how they contribute to it? Or should we push it down and say, you know what? You create your own concept of an objective. This is not really important to your business unit. So focus more on the concepts within your industry to help you compete. And this is what it looks like. You take the objectives, the perspectives all the way to your left. Then you have the objectives next to the perspective to your right. And then you see across the top, you have contributory, mandatory, new. You just go down the list. You create a one sheeter with all your strategy and just put X's on there. You have a conversation with the business unit owner where they understand how they cascade down. You meet with them and you talk about each objective individually, and you say, hey, should this be word for word? The president said this is word for word. This objective cascades mandatory for you to do it. You give me some pushback. Tell me what you're thinking about this one. So there is a top down, a corporate strategy, develop the strategy. It cascade down to the business unit, then it align those business unit, then it cascade to the support units, right? From an SLA perspective. Or there's a bottom up cascade. The business unit develop their strategies first, then the corporate strategy is built off the key performance indicator from the business unit strategies. Then you align those business unit strategies, and then the support units come and support them. They basically, the support units come to each one of the business units and say, how can I help you? What resources do you, what do you need from me for this strategic planning venture? It's a conversation, negotiation piece. This slide here, Octavia, is this the right one?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So let me explain it. So a top down, hold on, we're getting close to our time. So a top down is the corporate strategy is developed first. Then the business unit strategies are developed predicated based on the corporate strategy, although they will actually create additional measures to compete within an industry. Then you horizontally, you have each business unit leader to talk to each other to see how can they support each other. Then those business unit leader meet with each support unit and have a conversation with them about what they need to do to support these business units to achieve success within their strategy. That makes sense, Octavia? Is Did I cover what you needed?
Yes, you answered. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're so welcome. And how are you? How are you?
Oh my goodness. After session.
Okay. So bottom up, we start from the bottom. You let the business unit develop their strategy and you let them go for over a year. Then the president and the cabinet determines which of the objectives within the business unit strategy can help take the organization into a new direction. Then you have a horizontal alignment conversation to see how can they support each other. Then you get the support units to support those business units to achieve those outcomes. Quick, we're getting close to the end. So there's three types of capital, strategic capital. It's people, systems, and organizational capital. This, we're going to drill quickly into the human capital. And this is the people that we need to mobilize to do the work. So this slide is kind of blurry. I put this together to say this. When you're dealing with organizational capital at the bottom of this one, please do never complete a culture strategy separate from a strategic plan. If you do, there will be a resource issue, meaning this strategy says that there's 9 initiatives for the strategic plan that cost $2.7 million to fund. And then 2 years later, you're still working that same strategy, but then now you decide to start building a culture strategy. And at the end, and then you determine that the culture strategy need to be funded $1.2 million. What's going to happen is you're going to have competing priorities and something is not going to be executed. You have to complete them together and simultaneously and determine as it relates to the culture versus the strategic plan, which initiative will be funded. And that's a concept called StratX. Human capital readiness. This is a quick model. You have the vision, you have the strategic change agenda, you have the strategic plan. Now you need to determine the people who will mobilize the strategy. Then you have change management, because once you start changing concepts for people, they begin to resist. But you see the arrow that goes down. Human capital ready informs the development of the people, which increases return on invested human capital. And I'll explain that more in detail. Let's go back to the strategy map. So whenever you think of the people in the organization, this is the area you need to focus on. What processes do they work? Do they impact? What processes do they impact? So focus on this part of the map, just the internal processes, because this is the area of development, education, improvement that we need to focus on for the people. Nothing else. Everything comes together if we can focus on the processes that they need to improve. So what does that look like? You determine the processes, you determine the people who advance those processes, strategic job families, you determine the competencies that's needed to advance those processes and the number of people who are on the teams that will do the work. You assess them, you get a readiness score, and you build the people according to what the readiness score is. If they're 80%, you can launch the strategy. If it's 10% ready, you don't need to launch the strategy. You need to get the people ready. And readiness could be in an area of not just training up the existing people, but it may be you need to recruit externally to advance that strategy, because if its competitor is already further along than you are, you definitely need to recruit. So this is a concept called strategic readiness. And this is the type of assessment you do with your team to ensure that, to determine the performance gap, to ensure that they're ready, right? You said the key at the bottom says the person can teach others, the person is well-rounded, can fly along, or the person is limited and needs support. The left side is what the person, the staff complete. The right side is the manager actually rating the staff on those performances. And we determine where that performance gap is, and we have to develop them in order to advance the strategy. Most strategies fail because we never assess the resources to see could they advance the strategy. Communication plan, basically create a communication plan once you finish your readiness assessment and you create your development plan to mobilize the people. You create a communication plan, and that's it, to ensure that everybody is communicating the same message after each strategy review meeting. These are some steps. This is what it looks like. What's the message for the performance project team, the function managers, the finance, the senior leaders in the impacted area? What are the messages? Is it face to face? Who is the sender? You have to determine all those things. Change management. You need to mobilize people through the change. It's called people logistics management. You have to get people from the initial state when they first hear about the change, transition them through to a future state. You will see people within your organization going in different directions. If the change is not effective, you're going to see holes. You see to your right, you have all these people that made it through, but you see to your left, only a few people made it through the transition. Most of the people either quit, opted out, or got fired because they just wasn't participating. And lastly, the management phase. You have governance calendar, initiative review, strategy review, and strategy refresh. Governance calendar looks like this. You basically determine the events of strategy, the events of operation. You put in your calendar. Everybody must be aligned to this calendar across the organization. Then you have strategy review meetings where people come in and they respond to the strategy. And you have strategy refresh. And strategy refresh meetings is when you set up some type of two teams that compete against each other to challenge the assumptions of the changes in the new market. So strategy refresh is a concept that happens at the end of the year. You must refresh your strategy at the end of each year. So you challenge this assumption by poking holes in different scenarios. So you write out several scenarios that exist in the market today. You have two teams, they compete for like 4 hours, and they poke assumptions against certain concept that the other team presents. And at the end of those 2 hours, you look at your existing strategic plan and you do red line edits to them in your strategic plan to compete and move forward in the future. This is just structured strategy review meetings. And then I can see this presentation so you can look at it yourself. And we're at the end. I think we went over like 4 minutes so far. So what do you think about the strategy management process?
It's a lot. It's deep.
I agree with with Octavia. Just not enough time. Just great information. It's like you gave us the appetizer, the entree, and dessert all within an hour and a half, which is not enough time. Because you just, as adult learners, just being able to process the information and how do we actually apply it into our real world scenario, and just the strategy, just the whole mapping of it. It's just a lot of intensive information.
Mhm.
So just when you do your next one, if we could have like 2 hours, or just, it's so good to
Yeah.
where it just leaves your brain like constantly turning and overdrive. Just very intense, great information to help add just information into our toolbox, not only just professionally, but personally as well.
Thank you. I know it's a whole lot of information, and I know an hour and a half is not enough for this information, but just trying to just give you some information, an appetizer, that where we can have a additional conversations going forward. This is if I'm doing a true development session, developing corporate leaders, this is an entire week of information that's parsed out in 4 parts. And they're actually building content as they go through these this whole process. How can you apply this information? What are the benefits and how can you apply it? Are you working on something currently? Because just to have the skill set, it helps to give you a more advanced approach to strategy where you can help an organization advance using these tools or concepts. If you use one or two of these tools or concepts, if your organization have a strategist on the shelf, you can help them take the strategy off the shelf. At that moment, you're not doing phase 1 and phase 2. You're doing phase 3. You're just doing execution. So you're helping them to align, you help them to cascade, you help them to create a communication plan and mobilize change in organization. So it depends on where the organization is, where you choose to focus. So before you go, let's do emotional footprint. And this is just from our records. So from a number on a scale of -10 to 10, what do you think you achieve? Put an English word, exciting, yay, no, whatever, too much information. And then what you found, was it interesting, surprising, or actionable in the chat? I tend to keep this information. I download the chat messages and I use it to keep improving the training, the education. All of this information will be I have an online library that I'm building out trainings that's portioned out into different chunks, videos that's talk about certain specific content with actual documents for download. In the next 30 days, I have at least 3 trainings up on my website, and I'll be able to send that information back out to you. So it's a coaching. You can do it's either through coaching or just completing. Okay, like that. So either through coaching or hold on one second, or just online trainings where it's self-paced trainings that you will be able to access yourself. These are some tools, books that I have. The colorful book here. So that's from the left. The performance journey is more of a workbook that you can use to help you walk you through strategy from beginning to end on Amazon. Strategy spelled Adam is more collegiate, is more academic, citation stuff in it, but it explains it very in detail. Then you have this La Hermosa Mente Estrategia is the beautiful mind. That's nothing but it's this beautiful art in that specific one. It won't be published until next month, but it's art, visuals that explains all the concept that I talked about. It's visuals like true art that's done by an artist, a painter. Then I have the All Things Strategic Club, which is on Clubhouse, and then at the bottom is I'm still designing this one. It's a deck of cards that walks you through the whole strategy process. So you just place a card down. That's the step you do, and it give you instructions. It give you visuals, everything on each deck of card, on each card. Next Saturday is mastering alignment, and that's only focused on the alignment part. So it's more detailed, but it's not as intense as this training. This took you through everything. And then the week after, March 4th is organization readiness. That's how do you develop a culture plan for an organization? And we're at the end.
Amazing, excellent job.
Thank you.
Wow, you're remarkable.
Thank you. I know it's a lot of information, and
Mhm.
I really was wanted to hold back on this one at first, and I said, well,
Mhm.
let me just give them a peek at
Mhm.
the entirety of strategy management, and then I can do these buckets of trainings later, a
Mhm.
section at a time. Well, any feedback?
Looking forward for the continuing weekly strengthening of the skills.
Right, thank you, thank
You're
you.
welcome.
I'm looking forward to being able to provide whatever help
Uh,
I can in information regarding strategy management.
I'm new to real management role. I just started a dialysis manager
Okay,
position in New York City.
okay,
So I'm looking, some of the organization, we have multiple clinic sites. They're 5-star. We're in the 3-star. So I'm hopeful that I can learn a little too. But this global concept that you bring about, it is not easy to implement. But I think part of it you can chop out and help get buy-in from the staff. That is very important.
that's true, that's true.
Mhm.
And I tell you, like, there's a book called Nudging.
Yeah, I took a note of it. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, nudging. And there's a guy named Dr. Malaz Bustani. He has a book called Agile Network.
Spell
You know,
that?
AG. Hold on. Let me put in the search. Agile Networks. Dr. Bustani. So it's called. It helps you to understand how to the social complexity of an organization and how to use networks within the organization to drive to persuade people to move in a certain direction.
Mhm. Thank you very much for your feedback.
Thank you.
Appreciate it a whole lot.
All right, thank you all.
Mhm.
Thanks for participating. I know we went over. Hopefully it was valuable
It's
information.
immensely valuable. Oh,
Dr. Wallace, I have a question.
Okay.
You mentioned next Saturday. Do you have regular sessions every Saturday morning? And how do we get that information on what your training will be on? Is it, I'm hardly ever on social media, and I just happened to run across this post and registered. So
Okay. So it's like every other Saturday. But I like the people in my email list. I will just send out new trainings that's coming up, just to keep you informed. But yes, most of it is through my social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, as how I communicate the trainings that's scheduled.
can you just add me to your email list, please?
Yes, I'll do that.
Okay, thank you so much. And you all have a wonderful weekend. Thank you.
I found it on Eventbrite.
Okay.
I'm not a
Okay.
big social media. I don't have social media. I have LinkedIn, but I don't use it. But I use Eventbrite a whole lot.
Okay. Well, thank you all. Thank you all, and
Thanks a lot.
enjoy the rest of your day, and
Mhm.
and enjoy the Super Bowl.
Thank you. You too. Take it easy.
All right.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
Bye-bye. Thanks.